Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. As I'm recording this episode, we're heading towards the end of the calendar year with everything that brings, including the finale of Strictly Come Dancing. Now, full disclosure, I've not watched it this year, so I've actually no idea which celebrities are fighting for the glitter ball. I can only manage one reality TV show at a time. And recently I found myself getting drawn into something that my daughter was watching on Netflix. It's a show called Love is Blind. I was absolutely taken aback by this. I started watching out of fascination. I mean, why would you propose to someone who's behind a wall that you've never seen? And then there are other people who are falling for the most transparent emotional manipulation. So I then find myself shouting at the characters on the screen, which means obviously I'm invested in it and I won't let her watch it without me now. Anyway, I digress. Back to Strictly and why I'm referencing it this week. With Strictly and many of these reality competitions comes the idea of how we feel about competition and our own development. To bring back the image from last week of the trilby hat-wearing blonde life coach, this is where she'd be saying something like, "Nothing grows in your comfort zone." And I'm not going to deny that there's an element of truth in this. But it's not the complete picture. We do need a comfort zone to start from, and perhaps to retreat to from time to time. We've all had a go at something, it's not worked, and we've had to go and lick our wounds, and reflect on it in our comfort zones. So you could argue that there is growth and development there. It's not good for us psychologically to be constantly stretched, otherwise we're going to break. We're all starting from somewhere, and this is where I bring in my Strictly reference of, don't expect a 10 in week 1. Now what I mean here is that for the most part, Strictly is an entertainment show. And what we really want to see in week 1 is Anne Widdecombe being dragged around the dance floor by Anton Dubek like a gran at a disco. I'm using Anne Widdecombe's story that I'm just going to segue in here. My mum was once given a travel hairdryer by Anne Widdecombe. A true story which has never failed to entertain me. We're not expecting Anne or any of the contestants to come on and wow the judges with their Argentinian tango at the very start. Because where's the fun in that? Part of Strictly's appeal is to see people get better. Us Brits love an underdog, and what could be better than seeing someone who was trying not to trip over their own feet in the early weeks turn into a graceful dancer after some tuition and practice? It makes us believe that we can achieve things too. It can feel a bit inspirational. So let's apply this to our own lives. If we're starting something new, it's very easy to expect that we should be good at it straight away. Learning something new as an adult can be extremely hard work, and feeling like a beginner again can have a huge impact on how we feel about ourselves. When we're small, we're often going to new groups or taking up new activities, and so it can feel less daunting than when we're an adult. And this is where the concept of imposter syndrome creeps in. Now, I find the idea of imposter syndrome a bit frustrating, because it's a term that's often misused. It's actually become quite a trendy term recently. It's like, oh, I've got a bit of imposter syndrome. Oh, I feel like such an imposter here. And yet, how can you be an imposter if you're a beginner? When you're a beginner, you're not supposed to know what you're doing. It's supposed to feel strange. It's supposed to feel challenging and odd, and you have no idea what you're doing. And also, where's the joy of learning something? I often find at the moment a little bit envious of my children going to school. I mean, not the whole social dynamics of it, I can't imagine anything worse, but the whole idea of going to school and learning for 8 hours, I think would be absolutely incredible. Imposter syndrome isn't this. It isn't that feeling of being a beginner, which is natural and normal, and that is something we've all experienced. Imposter syndrome is where you have all the qualifications, the bells, the whistles, the certificates, etc., and you really do know what you're doing, but you still don't feel like you should be in the room. That's imposter syndrome, not the, oh, I've just signed up for a new class or something and I've literally no idea what one end of the tennis racket is from another. That's completely normal if you're a beginner. But an imposter would be, to use my tennis analogy, I don't know, Roger Federer walking into an adult group and thinking, oh, I don't think I should be here. That would be proper imposter syndrome, because we know full well that Roger Federer knows exactly how to play tennis. So what's going on here from a psychodynamic perspective? I'm going to give you a quick recap for those of you who haven't listened to all of the episodes so far, although I would say here you are missing out. So psychodynamic thinking began with the theories and concepts of Sigmund Freud and his structure of the mind. So Freud talks about the mind in terms of the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. So in the conscious part of the mind, we have all the things that are going on at the moment. So consciously, I've got things like making sure that I get into the podcast everything that I want to get in for this episode, really hoping that the person who wasn't doing their lawn mowing next door isn't going to start up again anytime soon, and hoping that my tech works. That's all I've got in my conscious mind right now. It's actually quite small, the conscious mind. There's not a lot that's contained in there at any time. We've then got the preconscious, so that's the bit bubbling away underneath it. And this is where we contain things like, we could get this information if we were asked for it, but it's not there for us all the time. So if somebody said to me, what did you have for dinner last night? I'm not constantly thinking about what I have for dinner, but if somebody asked me, I'll be able to go, oh, we had chicken stir fry last night. So that's what's in the preconscious. I would have said years ago, it's telephone numbers. But as we all keep our phone numbers in our mobile phones these days, that's not necessarily so relevant. But what we have for dinner, what we have for breakfast, etc., that's all in our preconscious mind. We've then got the unconscious. Now we're going to keep all those things in our unconscious mind, the bits and pieces that we don't need to have in our conscious mind or don't want to have in our conscious mind. So all kinds of things like repressed memories that we don't want to think about, things that make us feel anxious. Those are the things that are going to be in our unconscious mind. The stuff that we keep away, we hide away, we don't want it there. Sometimes as well, it's the stuff that goes on in our lives that there's just too much for us to contain at any one point. We get so many images and messages and pieces of information bombarded to us on a day-by-day basis that our mind can't hold on to all of them. So the stuff that we don't need gets popped into our unconscious. One of the other things that we're going to be keeping in the unconscious are the messages that we've received as we were growing up. Things like, you aren't good enough, you need to work harder, look at Barry and how well they're doing, why aren't you doing as well as them? So you have these ideas in your unconscious bubbling around, and they're going to impact how you feel about yourself. And you may have no idea how or why these thoughts are there. They're just there in this great big stew of stuff that's going on. And this is going to impact how we feel, what we do, the actions that we take, the beliefs that we carry around us on a day-to-day basis. One of the reasons that this happens is through projection and projective identification from those around us. I'll explain that a bit more. When we project, we split the bits of ourselves off that we don't like very much, and we project them into other people. So when a parent tells you that they don't think you're working very hard, then what they're possibly doing is projecting out of them their opinion of themselves, that they didn't work very hard. They don't want to see this or feel this about themselves, so they push it into you. You then take this message, internalise it and identify with it, and then through the process of projective identification, it then becomes your story and your narrative, so what you believe to be true about yourself. This is how we can see things happening through families. Things get passed down through generations. These messages get projected down from generation to generation. So actually, it's not necessarily our stuff to start with. It can be from years ago. And that's what projection and projective identification mean. It's we split bits off of ourselves that we don't like, we put them into somebody else, and if that person takes that up and runs with it, then they have identified with it, and that becomes part of who they are, becomes part of their story. This is one way in which we can start to build up false expectations and ideals. Because we don't know that we're doing it consciously, it can become part of our identity. So to give you an example, I recently went on an arm knitting workshop with a friend. I love a crafting workshop, it has to be said, absolutely love them. And there was another lady there who had clearly been told that she wasn't creative and she wouldn't be able to manage it. So she was feeling really wobbly about it. But what she made was absolutely beautiful, and it was hers. It was her creation. So think about it rationally. If you're a beginner, are you going to turn up to a crafting workshop and be able to produce something that Liberty would want to stock? Unlikely. But if your motivation is to go and have fun and have a go at something, that's all there is to consider. Whether you're any good at it is really beside the point. My invitation to you this week is for you to consider where in your life you have high expectations of yourself. How helpful is this to you? Are you motivated and inspired to go further, or are you self-flagellating because you think you could and or should do better? Where in your life are you expecting to be brilliant at something when realistically you're very much at week one? What voices do you need to calm to bring your expectations in line with reality? There's every possibility that the voice in your head telling you that you should be doing better than you are is the one that you've inherited and is not for you at all. And as always, give yourself some grace. It can be difficult to recognise that we might have been doing more harm than good by pushing ourselves in this way. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.